How did the wildest sci-fi dreams of the 1960s end up describing the world we live in today? Back then, filmmakers imagined thinking machines, constant surveillance, and cities ruled by screens. Half a century later, those fantasies feel more like forecasts. These weren't just strange relics of a psychedelic decade, they were warnings. Forgotten films that saw 2025 coming long before we did. Let's rediscover the futures they predicted. Number 15. The Computer Wore Tennis Shoes, 1969. Before computers were household objects, Disney released The Computer Wore Tennis Shoes, a cheerful college comedy that hid an eerie prediction beneath its laughs. Kurt Russell plays Dexter Riley, a student who becomes a walking supercomputer after an electrical accident, links his brain to a mainframe. The premise sounded ridiculous in 1969, but it was the first movie to imagine the human mind fused with digital intelligence. What began as a family film became a startling metaphor for the age of data. Dexter becomes a sensation admired for his limitless recall, but overwhelmed by what he knows, an uncanny reflection of our relationship with technology today. Every modern concern, privacy, data overload, digital dependency, is hiding beneath the film's glossy, G-rated surface. Critics at the time brushed it off as disposable fun, but its ideas aged better than anyone expected. It predicted neural interfaces, wearable tech, and the dream and nightmare of limitless connectivity. Beneath its bright campus setting lies a modern warning. Once knowledge becomes instant wisdom, becomes optional. The Computer Wore Tennis Shoes might have been sold as a joke, but it ended up writing the first chapter of digital humanity. Number 14. Fahrenheit 451, 1966. In François Truffaut's Fahrenheit, 451 books are outlawed, and firemen are sent to burn them. When it premiered, audiences saw it as a metaphor for censorship in Cold War societies. But Truffaut's vision cut much deeper. He foresaw a future where people willingly traded critical thought for comfort, where citizens were hypnotized by wall-sized screens and shallow entertainment. Sound familiar? The film's sterile suburbs, endless screens, and passive citizens eerily resemble our modern obsession with streaming and scrolling. Oscar Werner's performance as Montag, a man slowly awakening from emotional numbness, remains haunting, while Julie Christie's dual roles as his wife and the woman who sparks his rebellion symbolize the split between conformity and curiosity. Shot in cool clinical colors, Truffaut's only English-language film feels strangely timeless. Critics in 1966 found it slow and emotionless, but in hindsight, that detachment is the point. It shows a society where emotion itself is rationed. Today, when digital feeds replace printed pages, Fahrenheit 451 feels less like a dystopia and more like a user agreement we all signed, without reading. It wasn't predicting fire, it was predicting distraction. Number 13. The Andromeda Strain, 1969. Long before global pandemics became daily news, the Andromeda Strain delivered a clinically precise nightmare about science on the edge of control. Directed by Robert Wise, the film follows a team of scientists racing to contain a deadly microorganism brought back from space. There are no aliens, no ray guns, just sterile laboratories, flashing warning lights, and human error waiting to happen. Adapted from Michael Crichton's debut novel, the movie's obsession with detail bordered on obsessive. Wise hired real-life scientific consultants to design the sets, and the multi-level lab, complete with airlocks and quarantine zones, still feels chillingly plausible. Critics in 1969 admired its realism, but found it too cold. Decades later, that same detachment makes it prophetic. The film predicted not only the fear of global infection, but also how bureaucratic systems would fail under pressure. Its clean visuals and data-driven storytelling mirror the language of today's medical briefings and digital dashboards. Watching it now feels unsettlingly current. The Andromeda Strain didn't imagine little green men. It imagined us trapped in glass rooms, trusting technology more than intuition, and discovering too late that our safety protocols are only as strong as the humans running them. Number 12. Alphaville, 1965. In Alphaville, Jean-Luc Godard transformed a Paris hotel into a dystopian metropolis ruled by an emotionless computer named Alpha 60. It wasn't about gadgets or effects, it was about control through logic. Every citizen in Alphaville lives by mathematical command, stripped of love poetry and individuality. Disobedience isn't punished by force, it's deleted. When it premiered, Godard's mix of noir detective story and avant-garde philosophy baffled audiences. Critics called it incomprehensible. Yet today, its vision feels painfully clear. A city run by artificial intelligence, citizens judged by data, surveillance woven into daily life. Alphaville is practically describing the algorithmic age. Eddie Constantine's trench-coated secret agent feels like a relic from another time wandering into our own. The film's decision to shoot real Paris locations instead of futuristic sets gives it a surreal immediacy. It's not the future, it's now. Cold light, endless corridors, and robotic voices create a nightmare that feels eerily human. In an era of predictive software and social credit systems, Alphaville looks less like science fiction and more like the first documentary of digital obedience. Number 11, 2001, A Space Odyssey, 1968. Stanley Kubrick's 2001. A Space Odyssey is often hailed as the greatest sci-fi film ever made, but it's easy to forget just how much of it came true. From video calls and flat screens to artificial intelligence in space. Tourism. Kubrick's visual symphony practically storyboarded modern life decades ahead of schedule. At its center is HAL 9000, the eerily calm computer that cannot make a mistake. The quiet menace of HAL's logic anticipated our modern fear of machines making moral choices. When astronauts talk to HAL, it's not just dialogue, it's the blueprint for Siri, Alexa, and every voice in your pocket. The sterile design of the spacecraft predicted Apple's minimalist aesthetic, while the film's depiction of humans lulled into passivity by technology feels prophetic. When it premiered in 1968, critics were divided. Some walked out calling it confusing or pretentious. But younger audiences saw something different, a vision of what it meant to evolve alongside machines. Decades later, it stands not just as art, but as a manual for the digital century. 2001 didn't predict the future, it built it. Number 10, Seconds, 1966. Imagine being offered a second chance at life, a new body, a new identity, a clean slate. In Seconds, director John Frankenheimer turns that fantasy into a claustrophobic nightmare. A secret corporation grants wealthy clients total physical transformation through surgery and a fake death. But once reborn, their perfect new lives come with constant surveillance and crushing emptiness. Rock Hudson, best known for light comedies, gives the performance of his career as a man who learns that freedom is just another illusion sold by powerful systems. The film was too bleak for audiences in 1966. Critics dismissed it as grotesque, and it flopped. But Seconds predicted a world obsessed with youth reinvention and curated identity long before social media made reinvention the norm. Shot with haunting black and white cinematography by James Wong Howe, the camera twists and distorts like a fever dream. Faces stretch, mirrors fracture, and every frame feels invasive, as if someone is always watching. Today, Seconds looks prophetic, a story about algorithmic beauty, artificial enhancement, and the cost of hiding from who we really are. It was the first great warning about the price of becoming someone else. Number 9. The Time Machine, 1960. George Pals. The Time Machine might seem quaint now with its pastel sets and brass dials, but beneath the retro charm lies a haunting prediction. Based on H.G. Wells's novel, the film sends its Victorian inventor far into the future, where humankind has split into two species, the idle surface-dwelling Eloi and the predatory Morlocks who live below. Audiences in 1960 saw an adventure. What Wells and Powell were really warning about was social decay, the widening gap between those who live comfortably and those who labor unseen to sustain them. Sound familiar? The Eloi's blind dependence on unseen systems mirrors modern society's reliance on invisible infrastructure, data centers, gig labor, automated production. Rod Taylor's earnest performance anchors a story that's both nostalgic and chilling. Its vision of humanity divided by comfort and ignorance has aged like prophecy. For all its colorful optimism, The Time Machine ends with a quiet horror that, progress left unchecked, might send us circling right back to the start. In an era of automation and inequality, The machine feels less like fantasy and more like a mirror. Number 8. Planet of the Apes, 1968. When Planet of the Apes hit theaters, it wasn't just a twist ending that shocked audiences. It was the revelation that we might one day become the architects of our own downfall. Astronauts land on a strange planet ruled by intelligent apes, only to discover they're standing on the ruins of Earth. It's a warning wrapped in pulp adventure. Charlton Heston's performance, all raw defiance and disbelief, gave the film its heartbeat, but the real star was the allegory. The story tackled genetic manipulation, animal rights, and ecological collapse before those were household conversations. The apes' rigid class system, scientists, warriors, politicians, mirrored the very human hierarchies the film set out to critique. Beneath the makeup and spectacle, Planet of the Apes predicted the consequences of arrogance and environmental neglect. Its bleak finale remains one of cinema's most haunting images, a statue buried in sand civilization reduced to ruins. In 2 hours, it encapsulated what countless climate reports now scream: if we can build, we can also destroy, and the warning still stands. Number 7. The Day the Earth Caught Fire, 1961. Few films captured the quiet terror of environmental collapse like The Day the Earth Caught Fire. This British gem begins not with monsters, but with a weather report. The Earth has tilted off its axis after simultaneous nuclear tests, sending the climate spiraling into chaos. Cities swelter, rivers dry, and panic spreads faster than truth. Shot in stark black and white with flashes of orange-tinted heat, the film blends newsroom realism with apocalyptic anxiety. Edward Judd stars as a weary journalist documenting civilization's unraveling while trying to hold on to fragments of hope. In 1961, it was dismissed as alarmist fantasy. 6 decades later, it feels chillingly prescient. Director Val Guest and writer Wolf Mankiewicz weren't just telling a disaster story, they were predicting the era of climate change misinformation and media spin. The film ends on an ambiguous note. Church bells ring, but no one knows if they signal salvation or extinction. The Day the Earth Caught Fire dared to imagine a warming world before the phrase even existed. Today it plays like a time capsule that knew exactly where the thermometer was heading. Number 6. Fantastic Voyage, 1966. Before micro-robots and nanotech were buzzwords, Fantastic Voyage shrank an entire crew to microscopic size and sent them into a human body to perform life-saving surgery. The concept was so far-fetched that even the studio hesitated, but what emerged was both a technical marvel and an eerie glimpse into the future of medicine. Directed by Richard Fleischer, the film turns science fiction into surreal spectacle. Submarines drift through arteries like coral reefs. Antibodies attack like sentient guardians. Beneath the dazzling visuals lies a startling idea that the greatest frontiers of exploration aren't in space, but inside ourselves. That's exactly where 21st century science has gone, mapping genomes, editing DNA, sending miniature robots through veins. Stephen Boyd and Raquel Welch play explorers in a literal sea of life, yet the real star is the concept itself. Critics praised the imagination but doubted its realism. Decades later, their disbelief seems almost quaint. Fantastic Voyage wasn't just ahead of its time, it was the first cinematic forecast of biotechnology's promise and peril. What seemed impossible in 1966 now fits on a microchip. Number 5. The World, the Flesh, and the Devil, 1959. Technically released just before the 60s, The World, the Flesh, and the Devil belongs to the new decade in spirit because it dared to imagine the end of civilization without explosions or monsters. It opens on a hauntingly empty New York City, where a lone survivor, played by Harry Belafonte, roams silent streets after a mysterious disaster wipes out humanity. What begins as isolation turns philosophical. How do you rebuild society when there's no one left to argue with? When 2 other survivors appear, a white woman and another man, the story becomes a quiet study of race loneliness and moral survival. Audiences in 1959 didn't know what to make of it. The film's message of unity across lines of difference was too progressive, its pacing too meditative for Cold War audiences expecting spectacle. Yet its vision of desolate cities, silent infrastructure, and one man communicating through radio frequencies feels prophetic. It anticipated urban abandonment, the fragility of global systems, and the question every tech-driven century must face. If the networks shut down, who are we without them? The World, the Flesh, and the Devil wasn't just the first post-apocalyptic drama of its kind, it was the first to ask whether our civilization could survive without connection. Number 4. The Illustrated Man, 1969. Based on Ray Bradbury's haunting short stories, The Illustrated Man weaves 3 chilling futures through the tattoos of a mysterious drifter played by Rod Steiger. Each image tells a story of virtual families, automated houses, and children raised by machines. When it premiered, critics were baffled by its structure, calling it too strange and uneven. What they missed was how uncannily it foresaw the emotional detachment of the digital age. The segment, The Veldt, in particular, stands as an eerie prototype for virtual reality addiction. 2 children prefer their AFI simulated African savanna over real life, shutting their parents out as the illusion becomes more powerful than reality. Replace the walls with screens and the illusion with social feeds, and you have the psychology of the 21st century. Steiger's intensity and Claire Bloom's quiet sadness turn what could have been pulp fantasy into something almost spiritual, a warning about what happens when our creations love us less than we love them. The film's hypnotic tone and fragmented pacing make it easy to overlook how accurate it became. Every tattooed story on The Illustrated Man is a reflection of us now, restless, distracted, and drowning in our own inventions. Number 3. The 10th Victim, 1965. Before reality television and influencer culture, The 10th Victim imagined entertainment as blood sport, an organized hunt, where contestants pursue each other for global fame and fortune. Marcello Mastroianni and Ursula Andress star as rival killers turned lovers in a world where murder is broadcast as primetime fun. Audiences in 1965 thought it was absurd satire. Now it feels disturbingly accurate. Directed by Elio Petri, the film's glossy, candy-colored aesthetic masks a dark commentary on spectacle and consumption. Its futuristic Rome, filled with corporate sponsorships, ads, and pop art weaponry, looks eerily like a preview of influencer branding and digital clout. Every kill is staged for the camera. Every move is marketing. At its core, The 10th Victim predicted the collision between fame and violence, between privacy and performance. The tagline could easily apply to the modern internet. How far will you go for attention? Critics saw camp. History saw prophecy. In an age of streaming challenges, viral stunts, and curated online identities, this swinging 60s satire hit closer to the truth than it ever intended. What once looked absurd now looks uncomfortably familiar. Number 2. La Jetée, 1962. Told almost entirely through still photographs, La Jetée is the quietest apocalypse ever filmed and one of the most profound. Chris Marker's 28-minute masterpiece follows a man sent back through time to prevent a ruined Earth from collapsing entirely. The catch: he's haunted by the memory of a woman he once saw at an airport. This small French film, shot with barely any budget, influenced generations of storytellers from The Terminator to 12 Monkeys. But beyond its legacy, La Jetée predicted something deeper, a future where memory becomes the only reliable currency. In our era of digital archives and algorithmic nostalgia, Marker's vision feels painfully real. Each black and white image lingers like a memory fragment, emphasizing how time and identity blur in moments of crisis. There are no explosions, no spectacle, just human faces frozen between what was and what will be. Critics in 1962 admired its poetry, but missed its forecast, that humanity's greatest invention would not be time travel, but the endless replaying of our past through screens. La Jetée saw our obsession with remembering before we even started forgetting. Number 1. The War Game, 1966. No spaceships, no robots. Just silence, smoke, and truth. The War Game, directed by Peter Watkins for the BBC, was banned from television for being too realistic. Shot like a documentary, it imagined what would happen if a single nuclear strike hit Britain, and how governments, media, and ordinary people would crumble under the illusion of control. In 1966, audiences weren't ready for it. The film depicted food shortages, misinformation, civil panic, and the quiet collapse of communication systems. The BBC shelved it for 20 years, calling it too frightening for public broadcast. but looking back from 2025. The war game feels less like a warning and more like a rehearsal for every modern crisis we've lived through: pandemics, digital blackouts, even climate disasters. Watkins used real locations and non-actors, blending fiction with newsreel realism so convincingly that viewers believed it was genuine footage. The government's response suppression instead of discussion only confirmed its accuracy. What it truly predicted wasn't nuclear war. It was our dependence on fragile systems of information and trust. The War Game remains one of the most chilling works ever made, not because of explosions, but because of silence, the empty streets, the fading radio voices, the quiet unraveling of order. In a world where misinformation spreads faster than truth, this forgotten 60s masterpiece stands as the most haunting prophecy of all. The future didn't arrive, it was remembered. Those forgotten 60s visions weren't fantasies, they were blueprints. Artificial minds, virtual lives, collapsing worlds, they all started on film. Which of these eerie predictions do you think came closest to our reality? Share your thoughts, hit subscribe, and keep watching, because sometimes yesterday's fiction becomes tomorrow's truth.